Gustav, Governor General, made several trips here to Point Coupee. He was no stranger to us in our hour of need, and you always supported us, and we really appreciate that. And also, in the years after Gustav, you've always been here in Point Coupee Parish. Your last visit was not that long ago. So I'd like to introduce the Governor of the great state of Louisiana, Mr. Bobby Jindal.
Thank y'all for coming out. We've got a number of elected officials, and before I want to thank the sheriff for first of all hosting this, putting this together. Let's give him a round of applause for the great job he's doing. Before I even start, I want to give a quick opportunity for our elected officials. Hey, nobody ever wants to be first, but if y'all will just quickly introduce yourselves, let everybody know y'all are here.
Major Tebow, State Representative.
Major, thanks for being here.
Kurt Kelman, New York City Council.
Constable George Miller.
Chad Aguilar, School Board Member.
Cornell Dukes, Otis Gerard, District 8.
Debbie Collins, School Board Member, District 8.
Anita Lejeune, School Board District F.
Jimmy Laurent, Assessor, Point Coupee Parish.
I know we got our superintendent here as well. I want to thank
Right here.
Thank you for being here. And we got a number of other local officials as well. Thank y'all all for coming out. I know it's a beautiful Wednesday afternoon. There's so many other places y'all can be. Thank you for coming out today. I'm going to talk about a couple of different topics. Let me start with something. You know what's interesting to me? I travel a little bit, and what's funny is when you meet people outside of Louisiana, when you talk to people from outside of Louisiana, it's amazing what they think about our state. You know, the reality is that if you think about it, in the last few weeks, we have looked back and remember the 5th anniversary of Katrina, and then a little bit later was the 5th anniversary of Rita. In between, our country remembered 9/11, happened several years ago. And it's funny, when you talk to people from outside of our state, they're always very concerned about Louisiana. And they'll ask you that, with a lot of sympathy in their voice, they'll say, you poor people down there in Louisiana, are y'all ever going to be okay? And you know what they're really thinking? They're too polite to say it, but what they're really thinking is, what's wrong with you people in Louisiana? Y'all been through 4 hurricanes and an oil spill? I mean, what more could happen in Louisiana? Are y'all waiting for a locust? I mean, what more could happen to this poor state? And every time they ask me that, I tell them the same thing. I'll tell them Louisiana's going to come through these storms and this oil spill, and we're going to be better and stronger than we were before any of this happened. What gives me the confidence to tell them that? It's not our government in Washington, D.C. It's not our government in Baton Rouge. It's our people. We have the strongest, most in the world. Indeed, I spent almost over 3 months fighting that oil spill off the coast after Gustav and I, as the sheriff said, went to every parish to see what we could do to help. And I was amazed time and time again by the endurance of our people. Now, I can tell you all kinds of stories about red tape and bureaucracy. You know, we all remember 5 years ago with Katrina. We had a local sheriff, not Bud, but we had a local sheriff complaining that he had reached out to the federal government for help during Katrina. They told him, they said, Sheriff, we're not taking phone calls right now. He called for help. They said, we're not taking phone calls. Send us an email telling us what you need. He said, send you an email? I don't have any electricity. I'm underwater. How am I going to send you an email? They said, Sheriff, put all those details in the email when you send it to us. You hear all kinds of crazy stories like that, but I'm not here to talk to you about red tape and bureaucracy during the oil spill. I can tell you all kinds of stories like that about the oil spill. Instead, I want to tell you a story about Louisiana creativity, ingenuity, that actually worked. You know, the oil spill really became real to me. I really began, the full impact really hit me one day when I was on an airboat out at Paso Lutra. Those of you that like to fish, that's great fishing out there. You know, when the river hits the Gulf, you can go out there and catch a lot out there. We were out there in an airboat, and as we got close to the wetlands, close to the coast, even before you could see it, you could smell it. This awful, awful smell. And then as you got closer to the grass, you could hear it. You know, this time of the year, anybody that likes to go hunting or fishing knows this time of the year, you go outside, you should hear all kinds of sounds. You should hear the marine life, the fish life, the critters, the mosquitoes, the bugs. You couldn't hear anything. The oil had killed it all. It was like the deafening silence because of the oil spill. I tell people it's the first time in my life I've actually missed hearing the mosquitoes. I actually wanted to hear the mosquitoes that day. And then you get into the grass, and you see it. This thick, awful stuff. And it sticks to everything. You put your hands into it, it sticks to your hands. You put a water bottle, try to scoop it up, coats it, sticks to everything. Gets on your clothes, you can't wash it out, it just sticks to everything. And the grass is already turning brown. Biologists tell us in 5 to 7 days that grass is going to die because of that oil. And what was so frustrating was it was sitting out there day after day, week after week. The federal government said, don't worry about it. We're going to use absorbent boom to go get it. That sounds good, but that's like throwing cotton balls and paper towels at it. I mean, it gets saturated, and that oil's still there. We kept pushing them. I said, Governor, don't worry, we've got a plan. I said, that's great. What's your plan? They said, well, one of our plans is we might have to burn the wetlands to save the wetlands. I said, how's that a plan? You know, and what I love about our Louisiana people, we may not be the smartest people in the world, but we're creative and we're hardworking, and when it comes to our backyard, we're going to do what it takes to protect our way of life. We were sitting around one day, and a Louisianian said, Governor, why don't we go vacuum that oil up? That sounds like a great idea. Why are we just letting it sit there? I called up the federal government and said, guys, why don't we go get that oil out of the wetlands? Why don't we go vacuum it up instead of just letting it sit there? They looked at me like I was crazy. Governor, it's the mouth of the river. You can't get a vacuum truck down there. There are no roads. You can't just drive down there. How can you get a truck out in those wetlands? I said, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. Why don't you put a truck on the back of a boat and go get that oil? And I hate this answer from the government. They said, well, we've never done that before. We can't do that. I said, well, yeah, but they've never spilled so much oil off the coast before either. Why don't we try something new? They said, no, Governor, we don't think it's going to work. So I told our National Guard to build a couple of prototypes. First one was literally, it was one of these pontoon bridges, and we had a big old truck on the back of one of these things. It was the funniest looking thing you've ever seen. But here's the amazing thing. It actually went out there and it worked. They had a hose that went off of it. They could go a couple of miles by airboat with this hose. They picked up thousands of gallons of oil. Indeed, there was a reporter covering this, and he asked me, he said, Governor, he looked at this funny contraption, he said, isn't that the same kind of trucks y'all use to clean the porta potties after football games? I said, well, don't put that in the paper. That sounds awful. I mean, porta potties doesn't sound very high tech. I said, put vacuum trucks. That sounds better. Put vacuum barges in there. It was the same kind of technology. But what I love about our Louisiana people is when people saw that on TV, they started calling us saying, Governor, don't use trucks. We got industrial pumps. Don't use pontoon bridges. We got barges you can use. Before you knew it, we had dozens of these things working. And they were picking up thousands of gallons of oil. And then I got a call about a week later. A federal bureaucrat called me up and said, Governor, we're shutting down your barges, pulling them back into port. I said, why? This is the one thing that seems to be working out there. And so, Governor, we haven't done our inspections yet. I said, what do you need to inspect them for? What are you worried about? They said, Governor, if they're not using the right kinds of valves, there's a danger they might drop some oil back into the water. I said, let me get this right. We're picking up thousands of gallons of oil and you're worried about a few drops? I said, Governor, those are the rules. I said, well, you've got to have a greater sense of urgency about this. I said, we'll give you 24 hours. You've got to get this done. You've got to go and get these inspections done so we can go pick up this oil. Well, several hours later, they came to me and told me they couldn't find phone numbers for the barge companies. I had to point out they'd approved every one of them. The right-handed government didn't know what the left hand was doing. By the next day, they realized how absurd this was. They said, Governor, we're not going to inspect the valves anymore, but they have to stay in port because now we want to count the number of life jackets and fire extinguishers on these boats. I said, why can't you do that when they're in the bays picking up the oil? And they said, those are the rules. Well, I made my way to the port. By the time we got there, miraculously, they decided they didn't have to do their inspections after all. They said they were going to let them go back to work, but they had wasted 24 hours in the meantime. And the reason I tell you that is because time and time again, we were told there's not enough skimmers, not enough boom, not enough supplies. Time and time again, Louisiana's people came up with creative solutions, like jack-up barges, like using pipes.